Have you ever had a moment where a hidden talent you never expected to use suddenly became the most important thing about you? Maybe you're sitting there right now thinking about that skill you developed years ago, the one that feels useless in your daily life. Well, let me tell you about the night when 7 languages changed everything for a woman who thought she was invisible. Zara Williams moved through the marble corridors of the Grandview Hotel like a ghost at 3 in the morning, her cleaning cart wheels barely whispering against the polished floors. At 24, she had perfected the art of being unnoticed. The wealthy guests who frequented Chicago's most exclusive hotel never looked twice at the woman in the navy uniform who emptied their trash and straightened their designer chaos. She preferred it that way. Invisibility was protection. The linguistics degree she'd abandoned 2 years ago might as well have been from another lifetime. When her father's medical bills had drained their savings and her mother's bakery had failed, graduate school at Northwestern had become an impossible luxury. Now she worked the graveyard shift, cleaning up after people who spent more on a single night's stay than she made in a month. The irony wasn't lost on her. She could discuss Proust in French, debate philosophy in Italian, or negotiate business deals in Mandarin. But here she was, scrubbing marble countertops and replacing imported soaps that cost more than her weekly groceries. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother asking if she'd eaten dinner. Zara smiled, typing back a quick lie about having grabbed something earlier. The truth was she'd been surviving on hotel kitchen leftovers and whatever she could afford from the corner market. But her mother didn't need that worry added to her growing list of health concerns. Zara pushed her cart toward the executive conference floor, where the late-night meetings happened. International business types who operated across time zones often gathered here after midnight, when the rest of the city slept. She'd learned to time her cleaning route around these gatherings, slipping in afterward to reset the rooms for the next day's negotiations. Tonight felt different, though. Urgent voices echoed from the Paramount conference room, and as she approached, she caught fragments of conversation that made her steps slow. They were speaking Italian, but badly. Very badly. Through the slightly open door, she could see a group of men in expensive suits gathered around a massive mahogany table. At the head sat someone she'd never seen before, but his presence dominated the room even from her limited view. Dark hair, olive skin, and an aura of controlled power that made her pulse quicken without understanding why. A nervous-looking man with thinning hair was attempting to translate between what appeared to be Italian and Chinese businessmen. But Zara's stomach dropped as she realized the magnitude of his mistakes. He was translating offer as ultimatum, partnership as subordination, and cooperation as surrender. This wasn't just bad translation. This was the kind of catastrophic miscommunication that started wars. The man at the head of the table spoke again in rapid Italian, his voice carrying an edge that suggested patience wearing thin. The translator bobbed his head nervously and butchered the meaning so completely that Zara actually winced. He had just told the Chinese delegation that their proposal was insulting and they should leave immediately. That wasn't what the Italian speaker had said at all. Zara's hands gripped her cleaning cart as she watched the Chinese businessmen's faces darken with confusion and rising anger. The room's tension was escalating by the second, millions of dollars in deals crumbling because one incompetent translator couldn't distinguish between respect and disrespect. She should walk away. This wasn't her business. She was invisible, remember? Just the cleaning lady who wasn't supposed to understand the languages being murdered in that conference room. But watching this disaster unfold was like witnessing a car accident in slow motion. Her linguistics training screamed at her to intervene, while her survival instincts demanded she disappear before anyone noticed her presence. The Chinese delegation's leader stood abruptly, his Mandarin crisp with barely controlled fury as he began what was clearly a formal withdrawal from negotiations. Zara understood every word. He was calling the entire meeting a waste of time and questioning whether the other party had any genuine interest in respectful business relationships. The translator, completely lost, began stammering something about scheduling another meeting, which only made everything worse. That's when Zara made the decision that would change her life forever. She cleared her throat softly and spoke in perfect Mandarin, her voice carrying clearly through the open doorway. "Mr. Chun," she said, "there has been a significant misunderstanding in translation. Mr. Moretti expressed great respect for your proposal, and wishes to discuss the partnership terms in detail. The previous translation was inaccurate. The room went dead silent. Every head turned toward the doorway where Zara stood frozen, her cleaning cart suddenly feeling like a spotlight illuminating her presence. The Chinese delegation looked surprised but intrigued. The incompetent translator looked mortified, and the man at the head of the table, the one she now knew was named Moretti, was staring at her with an intensity that made her knees weak. He spoke again in Italian, his voice measured and controlled, asking if she had understood everything that had been discussed. Zara nodded, switching languages smoothly. Yes, sir. The translator has made several critical errors that have misrepresented your intentions and Mr. Chin's responses. Moretti's eyes never left her face as he gestured for her to continue. His Italian was elegant, educated, asking her to clarify exactly what had been miscommunicated. She found herself stepping into the room, abandoning her card in the hallway as she began to bridge the language gap that had been threatening to destroy whatever negotiations were taking place. Her voice grew stronger as she translated accurately between Italian and Mandarin, watching both sides' expressions shift from confusion to understanding to growing interest. 10 minutes later, the Chinese delegation was nodding appreciatively, and Moretti was leaning back in his chair with something that might have been amusement playing at the corners of his mouth. The original translator had been dismissed with a curt nod and was now gathering his materials with shaking hands. When the immediate crisis was resolved and both sides agreed to reconvene the next day with proper translation, Mr. Chin approached Zara directly. In flawless English, he thanked her for preventing what could have been a disastrous misunderstanding. After the Chinese delegation left, Zara found herself alone in the conference room with Moretti and two other men who had the unmistakable bearing of bodyguards or associates. The reality of what she'd just done began to settle over her like cold water. She had inserted herself into a high-stakes business meeting. She had contradicted a professional translator. She had drawn attention to herself in exactly the way she'd spent 2 years avoiding. Moretti stood slowly, and Zara realized he was taller than she'd estimated, probably 6 foot whoa, with broad shoulders that filled his impeccably tailored charcoal suit. His eyes were a striking green-gray that seemed to see everything, and right now they were focused entirely on her. He spoke in English, his accent lending sophistication to each word. You speak Italian and Mandarin fluently. What other languages do you know? Zara's mouth felt dry. French, Spanish, Arabic, and Russian. Some Portuguese and German, but not fluently. 7 languages, he said, and it wasn't a question. Where did you study? Northwestern. Linguistics program. She didn't mention that she'd never finished. And you work here as cleaning staff because? Financial necessity, she answered honestly, lifting her chin despite feeling completely out of place in her Navy uniform surrounded by all this expensive masculine authority. One of his associates leaned forward to whisper something in his ear, but Moretti held up a hand without breaking eye contact with Zara. What's your name? Zara Williams. Well, Zara Williams, you just saved a very important deal. A deal worth considerably more than whatever this hotel pays you to empty wastebaskets. She wasn't sure if that was a statement or a question, so she remained silent. Do you know who I am? No, sir. Dante Moretti. I run several international business ventures that require precise communication across language barriers. As you witnessed tonight, competent translation can be challenging to find. Zara's heart was beating so hard she was sure he could hear it. This felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing that her next words would determine whether she stepped back to safety or leaped into the unknown. The smart thing would be to thank him for his time, collect her cleaning cart, and disappear back into her comfortable invisibility. Instead, she heard herself ask, "What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Moretti?" His smile was slow and dangerous and made something flutter low in her stomach. That, Miss Williams, depends entirely on how much you value your current invisibility. Because after tonight, I can promise you one thing. You'll never be invisible again. Dante Moretti had built his empire on reading people, on recognizing opportunity and threat with equal precision. In his 32 years, he learned that the most dangerous individuals were often the ones who appeared harmless on the surface. The woman standing before him in a hotel cleaning uniform was the perfect example. Zara Williams. Even her name was deceptively simple, giving no hint of the linguistic arsenal she'd just deployed to salvage his negotiations with the Chin family. Most people who spoke multiple languages had an agenda, a background in international business or diplomacy. They didn't push cleaning carts through luxury hotels at 3 in the morning, which made her either incredibly unlucky or incredibly dangerous. He studied her face as she waited for his response, noting the way she held herself despite the obvious disparity in their circumstances. Her dark skin had a warm undertone that suggested mixed heritage, and her eyes were intelligent, wary. She wasn't intimidated by him, which was both refreshing and concerning. Most people were intimidated by him. It made life simpler. Parliamo in Italiano, he said suddenly, switching to rapid conversational Italian. Tell me about the Chun family's actual concerns regarding timeline and distribution channels. She didn't hesitate, her Italian flowing with the kind of fluency that came from years of study rather than casual exposure. She outlined Mr. Chin's specific reservations about shipping logistics and regulatory compliance, details that had been completely lost in the translator's butchered attempts. Her accent was slight but correct, her syntax sophisticated. This wasn't someone who'd learned Italian from tourist phrasebooks. Dante switched to French mid-sentence, a linguistic curveball designed to catch her off guard. Zara followed the transition seamlessly, continuing her explanation of the Chun family's concerns without missing a beat. Her French was Parisian, educated, the kind spoken in university seminars rather than vacation conversations. Impressive, he said, returning to English. Russian? She nodded. Arabic too, though my dialectal range is limited to Modern Standard and Egyptian. 7 languages. Northwestern Linguistics Program. Working hotel night shifts. The pieces didn't fit together, and Dante Moretti had survived this long by never ignoring inconsistencies. Marco shifted beside him, recognizing the signs of his boss's analytical focus. After 15 years as Dante's lieutenant, Marco could read the subtle changes in posture that meant potential threat assessment was underway. Miss Williams, Dante said carefully, do you understand what kind of meeting you just participated in? Zara's hesitation was brief, but telling. High-stakes international business negotiations. Import-export arrangements, perhaps. Or investment partnerships. Close, but not complete. The Chun family represents certain interests in the Pacific Rim market. Interests that are highly competitive and occasionally hostile to outside partnerships. He watched her process this information, saw the moment understanding dawned in her eyes. You're telling me this wasn't just a business meeting. I'm telling you that by demonstrating your linguistic capabilities in front of Mr. Chun and his associates, you've become a person of interest to several parties who prefer to operate without witnesses. The color drained from her face, but she didn't step back. Dante found himself grudgingly impressed by her composure. What does that mean exactly? It means that within 6 hours, word of tonight's translator will reach ears beyond this room. It means that a woman who can understand 7 languages becomes valuable to people who prefer their conversations remain private. Zara's hands trembled slightly as the implications settled over her. I just wanted to prevent a misunderstanding. And in doing so, you've made yourself either an asset or a liability to some very powerful people. The distinction depends entirely on your next decisions. Marco stepped forward. Boss, we should move this conversation. Agreed, Dante said. Miss Williams, I need you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you. She nodded, though he could see her fighting the urge to flee. My business interests extend beyond what most people would consider legitimate commerce. Tonight's meeting involved territories and partnerships that certain families consider their exclusive domain. By witnessing those negotiations and demonstrating your linguistic skills, you've inadvertently placed yourself in their crosshairs. Zara's breathing had become shallow. Are you saying I'm in danger? I'm saying that your apartment has probably been under surveillance since you left work tonight. I'm saying that the woman who was invisible 12 hours ago is now very visible to people who eliminate complications. The silence stretched between them while she absorbed this. Dante could practically see her mind racing through possibilities, consequences, escape routes. What do you want from me? She asked finally. Right now, I want you to stay alive. Which means you're coming with us. I have to work tomorrow. I have responsibilities. Miss Williams, Dante said with the kind of patience he usually reserved for teaching lessons to rivals. Tomorrow your responsibilities include not being found dead in an alley. Everything else is secondary. She looked around the conference room as if seeing it clearly for the first time. The expensive art, the imported furniture, the subtle signs of wealth and power that she'd been cleaning around for 2 years without truly noticing. You're not just a businessman, are you? Dante's smile held no warmth. I'm a businessman who operates in markets where negotiations sometimes require different forms of persuasion than what they teach at Northwestern. The euphemism hung between them while Zara connected the dots. Marco's phone buzzed, and he answered with a terse yes before turning to Dante. Her building. 2 cars have been sitting outside for the past hour. Zara's knees buckled slightly. This is insane. I was just trying to help. And now I'm trying to help you, Dante said, stepping closer. You have 2 choices. Come with us now, voluntarily, and let me protect you while we figure out how to resolve this situation. Or try to go home to your apartment and discover exactly how interested certain parties have become in your newfound visibility. She stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for something she could trust. How do I know you're any safer than whoever else might be interested in me? Because, Miss Williams, you're more valuable to me alive and cooperative than dead and silent. The same cannot be said for my competitors. It was a brutal truth, but Dante had learned that honesty, however harsh, was often the most effective form of persuasion. Zara closed her eyes briefly, and when she opened them, he saw resignation mixed with determination. If I agree to this, what happens to my life? My mother, my work, everything I've built here? We adapt. We find solutions. But first, we keep you breathing. She nodded slowly. How long? Until the situation resolves itself, or until we eliminate the threat. The way he said eliminate made something cold settle in her stomach, but Zara realized she was past the point of naive choices. My mother will worry if I don't check in. You'll call her from a secure location. Tell her you've taken a temporary job opportunity that requires travel. And my supervisor at the hotel will be informed that you're taking emergency leave for family reasons. Dante gestured toward the door where Marco was already gathering intelligence on their safest exit route. Miss Williams, I understand this is overwhelming, but the window for easy solutions closed the moment you opened your mouth in 7 languages. Now we deal with the consequences. Zara looked back at her abandoned cleaning cart in the hallway, at the simple life she'd built from necessity and determination. In one moment of courage, she destroyed 2 years of careful invisibility. What if I hadn't intervened tonight? Then Mr. Chun would have walked away, my deal would have collapsed, and you'd be going home to your apartment to worry about rent money instead of rival families. But I did intervene. Yes, Dante said, studying her face. You did. The question now is whether that was the worst mistake of your life or the beginning of something much more interesting. Against every instinct for self-preservation, against every lesson her mother had taught her about staying small and safe, Zara heard herself say, I guess we're about to find out. The smile that crossed Dante Moretti's face was predatory and protective in equal measure, and Zara realized she'd just agreed to enter a world where those 2 qualities were often indistinguishable. Zara had cleaned penthouses before, but she'd never lived in one. Dante's apartment occupied the entire 42nd floor of a building that commanded views of Lake Michigan and the Chicago skyline. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around living spaces that could have housed her entire extended family, furnished with pieces that belonged in museums rather than homes. She stood in the guest bedroom he'd assigned her, holding the small overnight bag Marco had retrieved from her apartment, and tried to process the surreal turn her life had taken. 18 hours ago, she'd been worrying about grocery money. Now she was a protected witness in a world she didn't understand, surrounded by luxury that made her feel like an imposter. The guest room alone was larger than her studio apartment, with its own marble bathroom and a walk-in closet that could store more clothes than she owned. Everything was decorated in muted grays and whites, sophisticated and impersonal, like a high-end hotel suite, which, she supposed, was exactly what it was for her. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Come in, she called, expecting Marco or one of the other security personnel she'd glimpsed moving efficiently through the apartment. Instead, Dante appeared in the doorway, having changed from his business suit into dark jeans and a black sweater that somehow made him look less intimidating and more dangerous at the same time. I thought you might be hungry, he said. I don't keep much food here, but I can have something delivered. Zara realized she hadn't eaten since her hurried breakfast 12 hours earlier, but the idea of ordering expensive takeout felt wrong somehow. I don't want to be any more trouble than I already am. Trouble, Dante repeated, leaning against the doorframe. Miss Williams, you prevented a multi-million-dollar deal from collapsing. The least I can do is feed you. She studied his face, looking for the calculation she expected to find there. Instead, she saw something that might have been genuine concern. What do you usually eat? He asked. When you're not living under protection, I mean. The question was simple, but it felt loaded with implications about the gulf between their circumstances. Whatever's on sale, she answered honestly. Rice and beans. Pasta with whatever vegetables are cheapest. Sometimes my mother brings leftovers from the restaurant where she works. Dante's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. What kind of restaurant? A little Cuban place in Pilsen. Nothing fancy, but her arroz con pollo is incredible. I know the neighborhood, he said. My family used to live not far from there when I was young. This surprised her. The man who owned penthouse apartments and conducted international business in $1,000 suits had grown up in one of Chicago's working-class immigrant neighborhoods. Before you ask, yes, things changed significantly when I got older. She wanted to ask how, but something in his tone suggested that conversation belonged to a different level of trust than they'd reached. What sounds good tonight? He continued. I can have Marco pick up Cuban food, or we can order from anywhere in the city. The thoughtfulness caught her off guard. She'd expected him to treat her like a problem to be managed, not a guest whose preferences mattered. Cuban food sounds perfect, she said, but only if you're eating too. His smile was brief, but genuine. Deal. While they waited for Marco to return with dinner, Dante gave her a tour of the apartment. The kitchen was spectacular, all professional-grade appliances and granite counters, clearly designed for serious cooking even though he'd admitted to rarely using it. You cook? He asked, noticing the way she ran her fingers over the butcher block island. When I can afford ingredients worth cooking. My mother taught me, but most of what I know works better with a full pantry than whatever's left after paying bills. He made a mental note of this, filing it away with the other details he was collecting about what made Zara Williams comfortable. The living room was where his personality showed through the expensive neutrality. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with volumes in multiple languages. Business texts, classical literature, philosophy, and history. The kind of collection that suggested genuine intellectual curiosity rather than decoration. Zara found herself drawn to the books, reading titles in languages she recognized, and some she didn't. You read Calvino in Italian, she observed, pulling out a worn copy of Invisible Cities. Original language is always preferable when possible. Translation inevitably loses nuance. She nodded, understanding completely. It was one of the frustrations that had driven her toward linguistics in the first place, the way meaning shifted and compressed when moving between languages. This was your copy from school? She asked, noting the marginalia and highlighting. University, yes. Before I understood that academic theory and practical application were entirely different skills. There was bitterness in his voice that made her glance up from the book. You didn't finish either? I finished. Graduated with honors, actually. Economics and international business. It just turned out that the real world operates by different rules than what they teach in lecture halls. Zara understood that sentiment better than he probably realized. Northwestern's linguistics program had prepared her to analyze phonetic structures and grammatical evolution, but it hadn't prepared her for choosing between tuition payments and her father's cancer treatments. Marco returned as they were discussing the differences between academic Italian and the regional dialects Dante had grown up hearing. He carried bags from the restaurant Zara's mother worked at, and the familiar aromas of garlic, cumin, and cilantro filled the apartment. They ate at the kitchen island, sharing containers of rice and beans, tender roasted chicken, and sweet plantains. It was the best meal Zara had eaten in months, not just because of the quality, but because of the unexpected comfort of sharing her culture's food with someone who appreciated it. Your mother must be an incredible cook if this is where she learned, Dante said, savoring the perfectly seasoned black beans. She is. She wanted to open her own place someday, but life got complicated. Zara found herself telling him about her parents' immigration from Cuba, her father's struggles to find work that matched his education, Her mother's dreams of culinary independence slowly sacrificed to financial necessity. Dante listened without interrupting, occasionally asking questions that showed he understood the weight of deferred dreams and compromised aspirations. When she asked about his family, his answers became more guarded, but she learned that his mother still lived in Chicago, that he had a younger sister studying in New York, and that he'd taken over certain family responsibilities much earlier than he'd planned. What kind of responsibilities? She asked. The kind that don't leave room for other career options, he said, and the conversation shifted to safer topics. After dinner, as they cleared the containers and loaded the dishwasher, Zara became acutely aware of the domestic intimacy of the moment. They moved around each other in the kitchen with surprising ease, Dante anticipating when she needed space at the sink, Zara automatically handing him items to store in cabinets she couldn't reach. It felt dangerously normal, this sharing of space and routine tasks. It felt like something she could get used to, which was exactly the kind of thinking that would lead to heartbreak when this temporary arrangement ended. When the kitchen was clean, Dante poured 2 glasses of wine and led her to the living room, where the city lights created a glittering backdrop beyond the windows. "This is beautiful," Zara said, settling into the corner of an impossibly comfortable leather sofa. "It's expensive," Dante corrected. "Beautiful implies soul, character. This place is just well-designed emptiness." She looked around the room again, understanding now why it had felt so impersonal despite the obvious quality of everything in it. It's not a home, she realized. It's a fortress. Exactly. Secure, impressive, isolated. Everything necessary for conducting business and nothing necessary for living. The admission felt significant, a glimpse beneath the controlled exterior he presented to the world. "Do you ever get lonely?" she asked, the wine making her braver than wisdom suggested. Dante was quiet for a long moment, studying the amber liquid in his glass. "Loneliness is a luxury I can't afford. It creates vulnerabilities that my enemies would exploit. But right now, in this moment, he didn't look like a dangerous businessman. He looked like someone who'd built walls so high that he'd forgotten how to let anyone inside them." Zara set down her wine and turned to face him fully. "That sounds like the loneliest thing I've ever heard." Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the careful control that governed his interactions with the world. "Zara," he said, and her name in his voice sounded different, softer, more intimate than when he'd used it in the conference room. She leaned closer, drawn by the vulnerability she glimpsed behind his usual intensity. "Yes." He reached out to touch her cheek, his fingers warm against her skin, and for a moment the space between them disappeared entirely. "You should know," he said quietly, "that this situation is temporary. When the threat resolves itself, you'll go back to your life." "I know," she whispered, though something deep inside her rebelled against the idea. "And you should know that I'm not a good man. I've done things, made choices that would horrify someone like you." "I'm not as innocent as you think," she replied, though they both knew that was only partially true. "Zara," he said again, and this time it sounded like a warning, like a prayer, like an apology for what he was about to do. He kissed her then, softly at first, then with increasing intensity as she responded without hesitation. She tasted wine and want, and something desperate beneath his carefully maintained control. Her hands found their way into his hair, pulling him closer as he deepened the kiss, and for a moment nothing existed beyond the heat building between them. Marco's voice cut through the haze of desire like cold water. "Boss, we have a problem." Dante pulled back immediately, his professional mask sliding into place even as his breathing remained unsteady. "What is it?" "2 teams just hit the building. One's checking the parking garage, the other's working their way up through service access. They're looking for our translator." Zara's blood ran cold as the reality of her situation crashed back over her. "How much time do we have?" Dante asked, already moving toward what she now realized was a carefully concealed weapons cabinet. 10 minutes if they're thorough. 5 if they're not. "Pack light," he told Zara. "We're leaving now." As she hurried to gather her few belongings, Zara realized that whatever safety she'd begun to feel in the luxury penthouse had been an illusion. The real-world Dante inhabited had just reminded her that protection was temporary and danger was patient. But as she watched him move with practiced efficiency to secure their escape route, she also realized something else. She trusted him to keep her safe. even if she didn't trust him with her heart. The safe house was a brownstone in Lincoln Park, elegant but unremarkable from the outside, the kind of property that blended seamlessly into Chicago's affluent neighborhoods. Inside, it was clearly designed for security rather than comfort, with reinforced windows, multiple exit routes, and sight lines that allowed constant surveillance of the surrounding streets. Zara had spent 3 days there, learning to live with the constant awareness of being hunted. 3 days of watching Marco coordinate with other security personnel, of seeing Dante conduct business through encrypted communications, of understanding that the protection he offered came with its own form of imprisonment. She'd also spent 3 days falling deeper into something that terrified her more than the rival families searching for her. Dante had been careful with her since their interrupted kiss, maintaining professional distance even as his eyes followed her movements through the safe house. But she caught him watching her when he thought she wasn't looking, and the tension between them had grown thick enough to cut. This morning, everything changed. "We're going to see my mother," Dante announced over breakfast, setting down his coffee with the kind of deliberate precision that suggested the decision hadn't been made lightly. Marco looked up sharply from his tactical tablet. "Boss, that's not protocol. Too many variables. My mother has been asking questions about why I haven't been home for Sunday dinner in 2 weeks. The last thing we need is her deciding to investigate personally." Zara understood the subtext. In a world where family was both strength and vulnerability, unexplained absences created their own dangers. Besides, Dante continued, looking directly at her, it's time Zara understood what she's become part of. 2 hours later, they pulled up to a modest house in Little Italy, the kind of neighborhood where generations of families had built their lives around tradition, loyalty, and the complicated mathematics of survival. Dante's mother, Isabella Moretti, was exactly what Zara had expected and nothing like she'd prepared for. Small and elegant in her late 60s, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a perfect chignon and eyes that missed nothing. She embraced her son with fierce affection, then turned those sharp, dark eyes on Zara with obvious curiosity. "And who is this beautiful young woman?" Isabella asked in accented English, taking Zara's hands in her own surprisingly strong grip. "Mama, this is Zara Williams. She's been helping with some international business negotiations." "Ah," Isabella said, switching smoothly to Italian. "Another translator who doesn't understand the importance of family dinner." Zara responded in the same language, her tone respectful but warm. "Mrs. Moretti, your son speaks of you often and with great love. I'm honored to meet you." Isabella's eyebrows rose at the fluent Italian, and Zara caught Dante's slight smile at his mother's surprise. "You speak our language beautifully, child. Where did you learn?" "University studies, but also from listening to my neighbors growing up. Language is more than grammar, it's culture and heart." The older woman's expression softened considerably. "This one has sense," she said to Dante in rapid Italian. "Much better than that cold fish you brought last Christmas." "Mama," Dante warned, though he looked more amused than annoyed. "What?" She had no soul, no warmth. A woman who doesn't eat with passion has no passion for life. Zara found herself laughing at the assessment, understanding both the words and the cultural context behind them. Sunday dinner at the Moretti house was a production that involved 3 hours of preparation for courses and constant conversation in a mixture of English and Italian that flowed as naturally as breathing. Dante's sister Sophia called from Columbia University, where she was finishing her master's in international law, and Isabella insisted Zara speak with her. Sophia was sharp, funny, and obviously adored her older brother while harboring no illusions about the family business that had paid for her education. "So you're the translator who's been keeping Dante busy," Sophia said through the video call. "He looks less stressed than usual." "Your brother works very hard," Zara replied diplomatically. "My brother works in a profession that ages men prematurely," Sophia corrected. "But you seem to be having a positive effect." After the call ended, Isabella showed Zara old photo albums while Dante cleaned up the kitchen, a domestic routine that clearly dated back decades. "He was such a serious boy," Isabella said, pointing to pictures of a young Dante with a solemn expression that made Zara's heart ache. "Even before his father died, always worried about everyone else." Zara studied the photos, seeing hints of the man she knew in the child's protective stance around his younger sister, his careful attention to his mother's needs. He was 15 when everything changed, Isabella continued quietly. Too young to carry so much responsibility, but he never complained. Never asked for help. What happened? Zara asked gently. Isabella's eyes grew distant. His father had business partners who felt the family owed them certain considerations after his death. Dante made sure those considerations were declined permanently. The euphemism hung between them, heavy with implications that Zara was beginning to understand. He protected us, Isabella said simply. He's been protecting us ever since. When Dante joined them in the living room, wiping his hands on a dish towel, Zara saw him differently. Not just the controlled businessman or the dangerous protector, but the 15-year-old boy who'd shouldered a man's burdens to keep his family safe. The drive back to the safe house was quiet, both of them processing the afternoon's emotional weight. Your family is wonderful, Zara said as they pulled into the secure garage. They like you, Dante replied. My mother doesn't give her approval easily. I noticed she kept feeding me. In our culture, food is love. If Isabella Moretti feeds you, you've been accepted. They climbed the stairs to the safe house in comfortable silence, but when they reached the living room, the tension that had been building between them for days finally reached its breaking point. Zara turned to thank him for including her in his family dinner, and found herself looking up into eyes that held so much it stole her breath. Zara, he said, her name a question and a prayer. This time, when he kissed her, there was no Marco to interrupt, no immediate danger to pull them apart. This time, she could lose herself in the taste of him, in the way his hands tangled in her hair, in the careful control that dissolved as she pressed closer. She'd never been with a man who touched her like she was precious and dangerous at the same time, who kissed her with the kind of intensity that suggested he'd been thinking about nothing else for days. When his hands found the hem of her sweater, she didn't hesitate. When he lifted her onto the kitchen counter, she wrapped her legs around his waist and pulled him closer. When he asked if she was sure, she answered by showing him exactly how sure she was. Afterward, as they lay tangled together on the couch, sharing the soft intimacy of whispered conversations and gentle touches, Zara finally voiced the fear that had been growing inside her. Dante? His fingers were tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. What happens when this is over? When whatever threat brought us together is resolved? He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. You go back to your life, he said finally. You finish your degree, maybe. Use those languages for something legitimate. And you? I go back to mine. She turned in his arms to look at his face. What if I don't want to go back? Zara, he said carefully, you don't understand what you're asking. My world isn't temporary danger and protection. It's permanent choices that can't be undone. Maybe I understand more than you think. You understand 3 days of it. You don't understand years of it, decades of it. You don't understand what it costs. What if I'm willing to pay that cost? His eyes were sad and tender and absolutely certain. You think you are, but you're not built for this kind of life. How do you know what I'm built for? Before he could answer, Marco's voice cut through their intimate bubble. Boss, we've got intercepts. Multiple frequencies, some in languages the regular team can't handle. Dante was already reaching for his clothes, the professional mask sliding back into place. What languages? Zara asked, sitting up and pulling her sweater over her head. Russian, Arabic, and what sounds like Mandarin, Marco replied. They're coordinating something big. Zara was already moving toward the communications equipment before Dante could object. Let me listen, she said. I can tell you exactly what they're planning. For a moment, he looked like he might refuse. Then the reality of their situation overrode his protective instincts. Do it. Zara put on the headphones and spent 20 minutes translating the most comprehensive threat assessment she'd ever encountered. 3 different organizations, working together to eliminate Dante's operations and anyone associated with them, including her. When she finished, the room was silent except for the hum of electronic equipment. How long do we have? Dante asked. 72 hours, she said. Maybe less. She looked up at him, seeing the calculations running behind his eyes, the strategic planning that would determine their survival. Dante? Yes. I'm not going anywhere. Whatever this costs, whatever it means for my future, I'm staying. I'm helping you fight this. The smile that crossed his face was fierce and proud, and completely unguarded. Then we fight, he said. And for the first time since this all began, Zara felt like she knew exactly where she belonged. The ultimatum came at dawn. Zara woke to the sound of Dante's phone buzzing insistently against the nightstand. She'd grown accustomed to the constant communication that governed his world, but something in his voice as he answered made her blood run cold. He listened for 30 seconds without speaking, his body going rigid beside her. When? He asked finally. How many? Are they sure? He ended the call and turned to her, his face grim in the early morning light. They have your mother. The words hit her like physical blows. Zara sat up, so quickly the room spun, her heart hammering against her ribs. What do you mean they have her? The Chen family's competitors took her from the restaurant last night. Clean extraction, no witnesses, professional operation. Zara's hands were shaking as she reached for her clothes. We have to call the police. We have to. The police can't help with this, Dante said gently. This isn't their jurisdiction. She stared at him, the reality of what he wasn't saying settling over her like ice water. They're going to kill her. Not if I give them what they want. Which is you. And my complete withdrawal from the Pacific Rim negotiations. Zara's mind raced through the implications. Dante's business empire, everything he'd built, everything his family depended on, destroyed in exchange for her safety. You can't do that. I can and I will. The certainty in his voice made something crack inside her chest. This man would sacrifice his life's work to save a woman he'd known for less than a week. There has to be another way. Dante was already moving, pulling on clothes with the efficient precision of someone accustomed to crisis management. Marco's coordinating with our teams. We'll negotiate her release and your safety simultaneously. And then you both disappear. New identities, new city, new life. Completely clean break from anything connected to me or this world. Zara watched him transform into the dangerous businessman she'd first met in the hotel conference room. But now she could see the cost of that transformation, the way it buried the man who'd held her tenderly just hours before. What about us? She asked quietly. There is no us after today, he said without looking at her. There can't be. The meeting location was Grant Park, neutral territory with enough open space to prevent ambushes, but enough crowds to discourage excessive violence. Dante had insisted Zara stay at the safe house, but she'd threatened to walk out unprotected if he tried to exclude her from negotiations involving her mother's life. They arrived in separate vehicles, part of an elaborate security dance that Marco had choreographed down to the minute. Zara wore a wire and a GPS tracker, with sniper teams positioned at strategic points around the park. She felt like she was walking into a war zone disguised as a peaceful Sunday afternoon. The Chun family's representatives were already waiting near the Buckingham Fountain, 3 men in expensive suits who looked like they'd stepped out of a boardroom rather than a kidnapping operation. Viktor Kozlov stood slightly apart from them, and Zara's blood chilled as she recognized the man from the intercepted communications. Tall, pale, with dead eyes that suggested violence was a tool he used without hesitation. Your translator, Kozlov said in accented English as Dante and Zara approached. Smaller than I expected for someone causing so much trouble. Where's her mother? Dante asked without preamble. Safe. For now. But my patience has limits. Kozlov gestured to Chin's lead representative, who produced a tablet showing video feed of Zara's mother tied to a chair in what appeared to be a warehouse. She looked frightened but unharmed. Mama, Zara whispered, her chest constricting with helpless rage. The terms are simple, Kozlov continued. Miss Williams comes with us. You withdraw permanently from all Pacific Rim operations. The mother is released unharmed. And if I refuse? Kozlov smiled, and it was the most chilling expression Zara had ever seen. Then we discover how many languages the mother speaks under pressure. Dante's hand moved almost imperceptibly toward his jacket, but Zara caught the motion and stepped closer to him. I'll go, she said clearly. Just promise me my mother won't be hurt. Zara, no, Dante said, his control finally cracking. You don't understand what they'll do to you. I understand perfectly, she replied, meeting Kozlov's dead stare without flinching. I'm the only person who heard all those negotiations. I'm a liability they can't afford to leave alive. Smart girl, Kozlov observed. Much smarter than your protector gives you credit for. But you're wrong about one thing, Zara continued. You think I'm just a translator who stumbled into this world by accident. Kozlov's eyes narrowed slightly. I didn't stumble into anything, Zara said, her voice carrying clearly across the space between them. I chose this. I chose him. And I'm not some helpless victim you can use as leverage. The attack came from 3 directions simultaneously. Marco had been monitoring radio frequencies and recognized the pre-assault chatter 2 seconds before armed men emerged from concealment points around the fountain. His warning shout coincided with the first gunshots, sending civilians screaming in all directions. Dante moved with lethal efficiency, pulling Zara behind the fountain's stone base as bullets chipped marble around them. She caught glimpses of his security team engaging targets with military precision, the careful choreography of violence that had nothing to do with the business negotiations she'd imagined. This was war. Viktor Kozlov had vanished in the chaos, but Chin's representatives were pinned down near the lake's edge, their own backup arriving in black vehicles that screeched through the park's access roads. "Stay down," Dante commanded, pressing a pistol into her hands. "Safety's off. Point and squeeze if anyone gets close." "Where are you going?" "To end this." She watched him disappear into the firefight, moving with the kind of controlled aggression that spoke of training she couldn't even imagine. This was the man whose world she'd chosen to enter, the reality behind the expensive suits and thoughtful dinner conversations. 10 minutes later, the shooting stopped. Dante returned to her position, blood on his shirt sleeve, but moving without apparent injury. His eyes held the flat calm of someone who'd done necessary violence and felt no regret about it. "It's over," he said simply. The warehouse location was extracted from Chin's lieutenant before the cleanup teams arrived. Marco coordinated the rescue operation with the kind of efficiency that suggested this wasn't his first hostage extraction. Zara's mother was shaken but physically unharmed, and the reunion in the safe house 3 hours later involved more tears than either of them had shed in years. But it was afterward, when her mother was settled safely in a guest room under guard protection, that Zara and Dante finally had the conversation that would determine their future. "You saved her life," Zara said as they sat in the darkened living room, the events of the day settling around them like dust after an explosion. "We saved her life. Your intelligence gathering, your willingness to be bait, your courage in that park. None of this works without you." She studied his profile in the dim light, seeing exhaustion and relief and something else she was afraid to name. "Dante? Yes, I love you." The words hung between them, simple and irreversible and absolutely true. He turned to look at her, and she saw her own emotions reflected in his eyes. "I love you too," he said quietly, "which is exactly why you can't stay." "Why not?" "Because loving me means accepting that today won't be the last time your life is in danger. It means understanding that my enemies will always see you as my weakness. It means choosing a world where violence is a regular occurrence and conscience is a luxury that can get you killed." "I already chose," Zara said. "In the park, when I told them I wasn't some helpless victim. I chose you. I chose this world. I chose to fight rather than hide." "You don't know what you're choosing." "Then explain it to me. All of it. No euphemisms. No protection from uncomfortable truths. Tell me exactly what loving you means." Dante was quiet for a long time, wrestling with decisions that would affect both their futures. "It means accepting that I've killed people," he said finally. "It means understanding that your safety will always depend on others' fear of what I'm capable of doing to them. It means living with the knowledge that every choice we make has consequences for other people's lives." He paused, studying her face for signs of the horror he expected to find there. "It means marrying into a family business that operates outside normal social contracts. It means our children will grow up understanding that their father is both protector and predator. It means accepting that there is no retirement from this life, no quiet escape to suburbia when we get tired of the violence." Zara listened to every word, weighing the reality against the love that had grown between them. "And it means," he continued, "that despite all of that, I will love you with everything I have for as long as we both live. It means I will protect you and any children we have with the same ruthless devotion I showed today. It means you'll never want for anything, never be powerless, never have to be invisible again." When he finished, she reached for his hands, lacing their fingers together. "I'm not afraid of your world, Dante. I'm afraid of living without you in it." The kiss that followed was different from any they'd shared before. It was a promise and a commitment and an acceptance of everything they'd just acknowledged. When they finally broke apart, Dante pressed his forehead against hers. "Are you absolutely certain?" I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Then we do this properly, he said, reaching into his jacket to pull out a small black velvet box that made her heart stop. Zara Williams, will you marry me and help me run an empire? Looking down at the ring, then up into the eyes of the man who'd changed her world in every possible way, Zara gave the only answer that mattered. Yes. Outside, Chicago glittered in the darkness, unaware that the woman who'd been invisible just days before had just agreed to become one of its most powerful residents. But Zara wasn't thinking about power or empires or the dangerous future she'd chosen. She was thinking about love and languages and the way some translations created entirely new meanings. She was thinking about home. 3 months later, Zara stood in the conference room of Moretti International, watching a roomful of executives hang on her every word as she mediated a complex negotiation between German manufacturers and Japanese distributors. The same conference room where she'd once pushed a cleaning cart. The transformation still caught her off guard sometimes. Gone were the Navy uniforms and invisible status, replaced by tailored suits and the kind of respect that came with being indispensable. She'd established her own consulting firm, specializing in international negotiations that required not just linguistic accuracy, but cultural fluency. Williams International Translation Services had a 6-month waiting list. The German delegation was particularly impressed with her understanding of their concerns about quality control standards, while the Japanese team appreciated her respectful acknowledgement of their decision-making processes. By the time lunch break was called, both sides were ready to move forward with a partnership that would have been impossible without precise cross-cultural communication. As the executives filed out, discussing details in their respective languages, Dante approached from where he'd been observing the proceedings. Brilliant as always, he said, straightening the collar of her emerald silk blouse with the kind of casual intimacy that spoke of months of shared mornings and comfortable routines. They made it easy, Zara replied, though she couldn't hide her satisfaction at the successful negotiation. When people actually want to understand each other, language becomes a bridge instead of a barrier. Speaking of bridges, he said, producing an envelope with elegant calligraphy, the final proofs are ready. Their wedding invitations. Zara opened the envelope carefully, admiring the way the designers had managed to blend Italian elegance with Cuban warmth. The text was printed in 3 languages, English, Italian, and Spanish, honoring both their families' traditions. Your mother will cry when she sees these, Dante observed. Your mother will cry at the actual ceremony, Zara laughed. She's been planning this wedding like a military operation. Isabella Moretti had indeed taken charge of wedding preparations with the kind of focused intensity that had raised a son capable of running an international empire. But she'd also insisted on incorporating every detail of Cuban tradition that Zara's mother suggested, creating what promised to be the most beautifully chaotic cultural fusion Chicago had ever witnessed. The wedding was held on a crisp October afternoon in the courtyard of the Art Institute, surrounded by sculptures and gardens that provided an elegant backdrop for the blend of traditions they'd chosen. Zara walked down the aisle to the sound of a string quartet playing a Cuban bolero that had been her grandmother's favorite song. Her dress was a creation of ivory silk and delicate lace that would have made any designer proud, but it was the look on Dante's face as she approached that made her feel truly beautiful. He stood waiting for her in a charcoal suit that had been tailored to perfection, flanked by Marco as his best man and Sophia as one of Zara's bridesmaids. But his eyes never left her face as she moved toward him, carrying the small bouquet of white roses and orange blossoms that Isabella had insisted would bring them luck. The ceremony itself was conducted in 3 languages by a judge who specialized in multicultural unions. Traditional Italian vows blended seamlessly with Cuban blessing ceremonies, while Zara's father offered a prayer of gratitude in Spanish that left half the audience in tears. When the judge asked if they had personal vows to share, Dante surprised everyone by speaking first in Spanish, then Italian, then English, promising to love and protect Zara in languages that honored all the cultures that had shaped their love story. Zara's response was equally multilingual, but it was her final promise, spoken in English, that made even Marco wipe his eyes. I promise to never be invisible again, she said, looking directly into Dante's eyes. Because you taught me that being seen, truly seen, is the greatest gift anyone can give or receive. The reception was a celebration that lasted well into the evening, with food representing both families' traditions and music that had guests dancing to everything from salsa to Italian folk songs. Zara's mother and Isabella had become such close friends during the planning process that they were already discussing holiday traditions and future grandchildren. As the night wound down and the last guests departed, Zara and Dante stood together on the terrace of the Art Institute, looking out over the city lights of Chicago. "No regrets?" he asked, pulling her closer in the cool October air. "Only that it took us so long to find each other," she replied, resting her head against his shoulder. "Well, Mrs. Moretti, we have the rest of our lives to make up for lost time." Mrs. Moretti. She was still getting used to the sound of her new name, but it felt right in a way that surprised her with its completeness. 1 year later, Zara placed her hand on her gently rounded belly as she reviewed the morning schedule, smiling at the irony of her current situation. 6 months pregnant and running a business that had expanded to include offices in 3 cities. She was busier than she'd ever been and happier than she'd ever imagined possible. The knock on her office door interrupted her thoughts, and Marco entered with his usual efficient demeanor. "The Chun family is requesting a meeting," he said, setting a file on her desk. "They want to discuss expanding their operations into South America, and they specifically asked for you to handle the negotiations." "Of course they did," Zara laughed. "Everyone wants the translator who speaks 7 languages and understands international business law." 8 languages now, Marco corrected with a rare smile. "I heard you've been learning Portuguese for the Sao Paulo expansion." Zara nodded, proud of the way her consulting firm had grown to match Dante's empire. They'd become true partners in business as well as marriage, their different strengths creating opportunities neither could have achieved alone. Today's visit to the Grandview Hotel was purely sentimental, an anniversary tradition they'd established to remember where their story began. But as they walked through the marble corridors that Zara had once cleaned, she noticed a young woman in a navy uniform moving quietly through the lobby, practically invisible to the wealthy guests surrounding her. "Excuse me," Zara said, approaching the woman with a warm smile. "Do you speak any languages besides English?" The woman looked startled to be addressed directly by someone who was obviously a guest rather than staff. "I speak Spanish and French," she said hesitantly. "A little Italian. But that's not really relevant to this job." "It's always relevant," Zara replied firmly. "Languages are power. They're opportunity. They're the difference between being invisible and being indispensable." She handed the woman her business card, watching her eyes widen as she read the elegant script. "Williams International Translation Services. If you ever want to use those languages for something more than you're doing now, call me. We're always looking for talented translators." The woman stared at the card as if it were made of gold rather than paper. "Mrs. Moretti?" she asked, recognizing the name from the business sections of various newspapers. "You're really offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a chance," Zara said. "What you do with it is entirely up to you." As they walked away, Dante shook his head in amazement. "You're going to single-handedly revolutionize the translation industry by recruiting hotel cleaning staff, aren't you?" "I'm going to make sure no one else has to feel invisible when they have skills that could change their life," Zara corrected. "Everyone deserves to be seen for what they're capable of." That evening, as they sat in the living room of their new house in Lincoln Park, sharing dinner and discussing the day's negotiations, Zara reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From invisible hotel maid to international business consultant, from lonely cleaning lady to beloved wife and soon-to-be mother. But the most important transformation hadn't been professional or financial. It had been the discovery that love didn't require her to become smaller or quieter or less than what she was. Instead, it had demanded that she become more visible, more confident, more herself than she'd ever dared to be. Dante caught her smiling and raised an eyebrow questioningly. "Just thinking about languages," she said, placing his hand on her belly where their baby was growing. "And how some translations create entirely new meanings." "Like what?" "Like how 'I love you' in 7 languages still doesn't capture what I feel for you." His kiss tasted like promises and possibilities and the kind of happiness that came from being completely, utterly seen. Outside, Chicago glittered with opportunity and ambition, a city of dreamers and builders and people who refused to remain invisible. Inside, two people who had found each other against impossible odds continued the conversation that would last them a lifetime, conducted in the universal language of love, respect, and perfect understanding. And if you're sitting there thinking about your own hidden talents, your own moments of feeling invisible, remember this. Sometimes the skills we think are useless are exactly what the world needs. Sometimes being seen is just a matter of having the courage to speak up. What language do you speak that the world hasn't heard yet? The answer might change everything.